Our next speaker is Stephanie Hill, who is Vice President and General Manager of Lockheed Martin's Information Systems and Global Solutions Civil Business. She's in charge of about 10,000 employees. That's a very big wheelbarrow with an awful lot of cats. She serves on Tech America, Public Sector Board of Directors, and the RTCA Next Gen Advisory Committee. They develop recommendations for the FAA regarding modernization of the National Airspace System, and I hope you do a good job on that. Every time I get on a plane, I want to know that Stephanie Hill just made those guys do what they're supposed to do. She's been recognized for her contributions to the advancement of STEM education and was selected as one of Computer World's 2015 Premier 100 IT leaders. That's a big deal because we all know computer science is even worse than engineering in general with respect to women and certainly underrepresented minorities, so go Stephanie. She was named the Black Engineer of the Year and included on the Ebony Power 100 list for making an enduring, lasting impact in the community and in the world. We're delighted to have you. We're looking forward to it, Stephanie.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here with you today, and I'm especially honored because of what your mission is, to recognize the contributions of women. And I'm really excited that you asked me to come because I happen to work for a company who has been committed to a diversity and inclusion journey for a very long time. And so I want to share some of that with you. I also want to share some of my experiences with you, and hopefully we can have a conversation. Hopefully you have lots of questions for me. I have been with Lockheed Martin for nearly 28 years. And I started as a software engineer. I was a computer science and economics major, and I'm kind of an accidental engineer, and that's a whole nother story that I hadn't planned on talking about, but I kind of fell into engineering, fell in love with it, and I'm so grateful that I did. But I started as a software engineer, writing code, and now I run a large business. The code that I wrote as a software engineer was largely for military systems, for US Navy systems. In fact, the first one was a launching system. And now I support in my business, you noticed, if you remember, that very long title, Civil was at the end of it. I have the privilege of supporting every federal civil agency in the US government. And so the FAA, we support. I saw some of my National Science Foundation customers here. We support the National Science Foundation and all of the work that is done, the research that is done in Antarctica. We support all of the IT and all the support there. We also have a very unique program with the VA, and it's called the Genomics Program. And in this Genomics Program, it's the Million Vets Program, and it is going to be the largest database of any genomes to help. The idea that the VA has is to get 1 million veterans' genes and to be able to, using data analytics, to be able to prevent, detect, and treat disease for the veteran, and really it will be a global, it will have global impact. One of the things recently, who saw the Orion launch? Hopefully folks, yes, the Orion launch. Our business supports our space systems company with the Orion launch. So if you haven't seen it, it is a crew vessel. It was uncrewed for its initial launch. It launched, went into space, and came back, had a very successful reentry. Look at NASA.gov or on YouTube and you can see it. It's pretty cool. Early in my career, I worked on a number of exciting programs for the military. And I had a lot of different jobs, software engineering, team lead, program manager, functional manager. One of the most exciting opportunities that I worked on was something called the Persistent Threat Detection System. And we call it PTIDS. And what PTIDS was, basically it was a blimp. It was a blimp deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it had surveillance equipment on it. And it could see when the bad guys would plant IEDs. It was an improvised explosive device, counter IED device. And it would see when the bad guys would plant IEDs along the road. And being the contractor for this, our Army customer would show us videos where you could see what PTIDS was watching. And you could see the bad guys plant the stuff in the middle of the road. PTIDS could notify our soldiers so that they would not come into harm's way. Then we could train the surveillance equipment, follow the bad guys back to their neighborhoods. And the scary part is the neighborhoods were just like yours and mine. And you could see them go into their homes. You could see them bury their arsenal of weapons in their backyards. And then we could go get that. The systems that we worked on were saving lives. And the mothers of Afghanistan wouldn't let their children go outside to play unless Peaches was flying. So when I think about the exciting things that I have had the privilege to be able to work on, when I was a little girl pretending to teach classes in my den, I never dreamed, number one, that I would be an engineer, and I never dreamed that I would have had the experiences that I have had to work on so many systems that make a difference, whether it's from a national security perspective or whether it's from a human perspective with the Genome Project, and so I'm grateful. But I want to tell you that in these 28 years that I've been working at the business, I'm not always what was expected when I showed up. As an African-American woman, leading large organizations through my matriculation in the organization, I was often not what was expected with the customer and sometimes with my team. And I can remember one period I had taken over, I was vice president then, I had risen to that level, it was really exciting, and I was taking over a new program, totally different program, and a portfolio of programs really, and one of them was very troubled. I mean, the customer hated us, the team hated it was very, very, very hard environment. And I came in and I'm working in my normal style, the way I'm trying to get work done, and someone who thought that he was being a mentor to me took me aside and he said, "Stephanie, this team is not used to somebody like you. They're used to a little bit more pound on the table. You know, you need to throw in a cuss word here or there just to make them take you seriously. They're not used to your soft touch." That was a very pivotal point for me because I'd worked in this wonderful company, Lockheed Martin. I'd had great success. I had had great fun. And I've always said that if I had to trade in Stephanie for a job, then it wasn't the right job for me. If I had to stop being authentic and acting with what I knew to be integrity, then I didn't want that job. And so while I knew his advice was well-intentioned, I didn't take it. And I can tell you that I don't know whether it was just because I didn't take his advice, but I can tell you that we turned that program around so that customer loves us. That team loves that customer. We delivered more successfully than we had delivered before. And I think if I have pounded on the table and made people afraid of me, then the kinds of ideas that we were able to get that led to turning that organization around, we never would have gotten. It was very good to feel that I could be in an environment where I could bring my whole self to what I did. And in fact, bringing your whole self to work is what our inclusion and diversity message is at Lockheed Martin. In fact, our CEO, who is Marilyn Hewson, our CEO often quotes this as she talks to our teams about diversity and inclusion, that she wants to have an environment where everyone can bring their whole selves to work, because in that environment, you're going to get the best innovation. Now, we didn't just start on this diversity and inclusion journey. Lockheed Martin has been on this journey for over a decade. And we started so early because we recognized that we solve the world's most difficult challenges, for real. This is what Lockheed Martin does. And in order to do that and continue to do that we've been 100 years old now, for the next 100 years, we know we have to have the very best and the brightest. And that the very best and the brightest have to be in an environment where they can give their ideas as often as possible, and they know that somebody's going to listen, irrespective of what they look like or who they are. And so we also have to build an environment that will accept the new demographic. We looked at the demographic over a decade ago and said, you can argue whether it's 2030 or whether it's 2040, but at some point, the minority population is going to be the majority population. There are more women who are pursuing STEM fields. We need more and more and more. And we knew that in order to, from a competitive advantage perspective, in order to make sure that our company continued to be at the top, we had to have an environment that was absolutely ready for everybody. And so I can remember when we first started down this diversity journey, we started with diversity training. And the diversity training was an interesting setup. They had all different levels in the training. So you had individual contributors, you had team leaders, you had managers, you had executives in different training groups. And as the facilitator started this first training session that I was a part of, he said, I want to hear why you're here. You know, what do you think you are going to get out of this? Why is this important for you to be here? And so he started, and you had heard some people who would say, well, you know, I'm really excited to learn more about diversity and inclusion, because at that time people weren't talking about it as much. You had some people say, I don't need to be here, it's really wasting my time. You had, you know, various things. So when it got to me, I told a story about, you know, my daddy was very clear about, I have 2 older sisters, so family of 3 girls, and my daddy was very clear about, when you go to work, I don't care what the other people have on. When you go to work, you're going to wear a suit. You're going to dress for the job you want, not for the one you have. And he kind of grilled that into me. And I was a software engineer. I was in a lab in the basement with water and mice and bugs and everything. But I had my suit on, and and my peers around me had on docksiders and, you know, golf shirts and khaki pants and everything. But let me tell you, because I always had a suit on, when the Navy admirals would stop by for, you know, just a pop visit, they always knew I'd be dressed. So I gave tours, and you know, they knew I'd be dressed. And by the way, I have to tell you, I had a good track record of performance, largely because I did a lot of that burn that midnight oil. There were many nights I didn't go home as a young engineer, but that's not true for everyone. You can do that. You can make it without doing that. And so I knew my stuff. So I'm telling this story. I didn't tell them all that, but I'm telling the story of how I would give these tours with all these Navy admirals. My boss was standing there with me with his golf shirt, his khaki pants, and his not so buffed docksiders. And I gave the presentation very, very well. And the admirals went off to ask questions. And every question they asked, they addressed to my boss, who was a white man. And he answered them. And what I shared in that meeting is that I wasn't upset with the admiral, because I understood that that environment was different. I was upset because nobody noticed but me. So, tell that story. My boss's boss goes maybe 3rd after I finish. And he says, you know, I was going to say that I didn't know why we were here because we have this great inclusive environment already. But then I heard what Stephanie said. And I was one of those cats. And this is his quote, I'll never forget it. I was one of those cats on those tours, and I didn't notice either. So I guess there's work to do. So the first step is awareness. And we went through early on lots of special mentoring programs, lots of special training programs, and all kinds of things that helped to really make sure that our environment was being prepared for what was the workforce, for people needing to move up, and what the workforce would be. But it's about, are you really walking the talk? And as I moved on into the organization, my first executive position, I was promoted to a director. And by this time I have 2 children. Hopefully if we have Q&A, we can talk about the children piece of it, because that's a huge dynamic. I am very blessed to have been in this company, to have had so many wonderful opportunities, been able to be successful with those, and have a marriage for 22 years that I am incredibly happy in, and to have 3 amazing children from 21 to 12. So when I got this first, this director job, which was the executive ranks of Lockheed Martin, I was not pregnant. I was so excited. And I was in the job for about 10 months, and then I got pregnant. And I had never seen a pregnant director at Lockheed Martin before, so I wasn't sure what that meant. And as I was beyond happy, personally, and I was a little trepidatious professionally. So I remember walking into my boss's office, and my boss had been my mentor, and he's just a wonderful, wonderful person. And I walked into him and I said, Dale, and I'm kind of wear my emotion in my sleeve. I could never play poker. And so I guess my eyes are getting a little misty, and I said, Dale, I'm pregnant. And he's looking at me, he says, what's wrong with you, girl? We're having a baby. I'm like, no, we're not having a baby. I'm having a baby. And so, but what he said to me was, he said, I have full confidence in you. I know that you are going to be able to deliver for me just like you delivered before. And if you need any help with anything, you come right here. What that gave me, even though I knew that too, because I had delivered my second child and this first COTS solution into the U.S. Navy at the same time. I mean, as I knew I could do it, I wasn't sure that he knew I could do it. And when he buoyed me up and told me he knew I could do it, but if I should have a problem, that I could come to him, there was nothing more motivational than that. And then, so have Cameron and everything as well. And we can talk to you about setting up nursing rooms in the building. We did that too under my wife. Lots of good things happen. And then we get a new boss that's a couple levels up, and she says to me, I want you to be my deputy. And this is an organization that is all over the country. I have a 1-year-old. And so I'm like, oh no, I really want this job, but there's no way I can do this job. So I talked to my sister, who at that time was the vice president for HR at Disney. And I'm talking to her, Susan, I can't take this job. And I'm afraid that if I don't take it, that could mean bad things for me. So she says, Stephanie, at Disney, we have our CFO of our business she just had a baby. You can do this job, it's not a big thing. I said, Susan, you work for Disney. I work for Lockheed Martin. There's a difference. You work for the most, And so then she says, okay, if you have to turn the job down, here's how you do it. You say, you really want the job, but you can't take it because at this point, there's just not enough work-life balance in it. I practiced that. So I went and I saw this person who was asking me to be her deputy, and I said to her, I really want this job and I appreciate you asking me to do it, but at this point there's just not enough work-life balance in it for me. You know what she said to me? She said, let's start from you taking the job because you're the right person for it, and let's figure out how you do it differently. I said, I work for the most! But it showed the incredible progress and the incredible commitment that Lockheed Martin had made to create an environment where you could bring your full self, even your full pregnant or just had a baby self, and you can be successful. That the sky is really the limit. And so we have been putting our money where our mouth is for a long time. And at this point, I want to share that we have our first female CEO, Marilyn Houston, who is a CEO of a $45 billion company. I believe on the Fortune 50 list, she was number 4. We have a third of our board of directors are women, 4 out of 12. One of our largest business areas run by a woman. Our general counsel is run by a woman. I can go on and on and on. Some of the stories that I told you, there's so many more stories that I have observed or I have experienced. Some wonderful and some not so wonderful. All important along that journey. We have something called a Women's Leadership Forum that was established. Actually, Marilyn Houston established it. She started it out many, many years ago as a ladies' lunch because there weren't so many female executives around. And the few that were there, she said, boy, we really need to get to lunch occasionally. It started with about 5 women. It is now, every year, we have a National Women's Leadership Forum, and it is now a room of 250 women. We also have a regionalized women's network where no matter where you are across our company globally, anywhere around the world, there are activities for networking, for having a safe environment to be able to ask a question that you might feel uncomfortable asking in another area. We have these forums all across the board. We have an African American Leadership Forum. In fact, it was the first forum of its kind to be started in Lockheed Martin. We have an LGBT forum. We have a military vets forum, and on and on and on, to really make sure that we are making a difference in creating an inclusive environment. It takes commitment. It takes organizational buy-in, and it takes inspiration. People have to understand what's in it for them, and that's the hardest part. But I can tell you, with the right mix of inspiration, buy-in, and commitment, you can absolutely make progress. You just have to start. So with that, do you have time for questions and answers? Okay, a few. Okay, good. Oh yeah, Norm Augustine was our CEO, and we have been really blessed with amazing leadership in our company.
How did it get possible for you to do the job that you want to do?
Okay, how
Nancy, can you go please for recording it?
so the question was, how did they make it possible for me to do the job that I didn't think that I could do? And I can tell you what we did a lot of virtual work. We did a lot of teleconferences. When I did travel, I have an incredible support system who was, at that time, was my mother, and sometimes mommy would go with me because I was nursing. And that was something that I was very committed to doing. And so when I had to travel, I took my mother. Many of the business trips that would have been trips we planned for a day, I could do a day trip. I knew how, I can tell you the flights that can get you. I've even gone to Minneapolis for the day and come back and made it home. And so we worked it in that way, and it was, it turned out well.
Flexibility.
Yeah, very creative flexibility. And I can tell you, what I tell a lot of the young women that I mentor is the reason that manager trusted me to do that is because I had established a track record of not letting the organization down. And so it wasn't a big risk. Now, I think we need to take more risk on some of these creative opportunities. But that was why. Yes.
I have a comment and a question. First of all, you're a very good face for Lockheed Martin, clearly. You are advertising them, you're giving them a good rap, you're doing all of those things. So you see, that's another way of selling high-level women to these places. But I don't know if you were here to hear me when I talked before lunch, when I said I showed up pregnant and I got completely banished, as Shakespeare would say. I got fired. And I was being fired every 3 weeks. People would bring me back, talk to the boss, and say, no, she has to go. So what is important is to bring your experience added to mine. I'm a lot older than you are. And then ask the question, how could people who had some of my experiences survive? So here is my question. What did your mom and dad do? And how did they raise you?
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. So I'll give you, my mother was one of the most supportive and encouraging people on the face of the earth. My father was, and I'll call him motivational. And I'll call him motivational because I was a very, very good student. I was, in fact, an A student. And every time I would bring a 95 home, he would look at me and he would say, Stephanie, where are the other 5 points? And he was serious. I would bring a 98 home and he would say, where are the other 2 points? And he meant for me to pursue excellence. But fortunately, if I'd only had daddy and hadn't had mommy who was like, babe, you did so well, I'm so proud of you, I might have gone crazy, right? But his idea was not, as I think about it as an adult, was not about perfection. His idea was try to figure out just what you're capable of. Don't leave 5 points on the table if you don't have to. Expand yourself, and only then can you truly discover your potential and the difference that you can make in the world.
See, I made that point too, that you need to have your father be supportive. Did you
Absolutely.
have a brother?
I did not have a brother. My father had 3 daughters. My father had 3 daughters, and he was completely committed to our success, as was my mother. My grandmothers were maids, both of them. My one grandmother was a maid and worked full-time until she was 93 years old. She lived to be 101. And she was in her right mind. She read her Bible every day and watched Young and the Restless. But her work ethic was what has shaped my mind about what it means to whatever your work is. You bring your best to it. You try to be the best at it. And you try to be the best person you can be. Because you can imagine, all those years ago, there were struggles that my grandmother experienced. Different from the struggles that we face today, because there are still struggles today. And she never said a negative word that wasn't constructive about anybody. And that that is what I believe is the right thing to do. That's that integrity and authenticity piece that I think can make the difference.
You got good genes.
I just wanted to say that probably the experience in Lockheed Martin represents something that's very different from academia, and that is that Lockheed Martin is a huge business that needs to be profitable and recognizes the extraordinary value, as you've mentioned, of the workforce. And I know there's probably a tremendous boomer workforce that is heading for the door at Lockheed Martin, just as it is in the federal government. And probably, you know, with efforts such as yours, you're really bringing on a new generation because you recognize the economic importance of this. And I think Deloitte is another organization that has the WIN program to help not lose women from the workforce because it's a loss of economic power and competitiveness. This is what we don't seem to recognize in academia and biomedical research, and I don't know how we're ever going to get that point across.
Well, can I comment on
Yeah,
that? I know
yeah.
that I think I'm probably out of time,
Yeah,
but I'll
yeah.
comment on that. You know, this was not when we started this a decade ago, and even sometimes today,
Yeah.
this is not an easy thing. There are often concerns of disenfranchising the white male, who's still the majority of our population.
Yeah.
Early on, starting this, there were many people who didn't think it was necessary. We're doing great, you know, it takes commitment from the top. It takes awareness. I mean, I told you that story about the being in doing
Yeah.
the tours and everything. It takes awareness, and then it takes somebody to care at the top and get it done. I mean, at the end of the day, maybe it's institution by institution. Somebody at the top has to understand that it's necessary, understand how it's going to help them and their organization. They have to be inspired, and then they've got to have relentless commitment, and you can get it done.
Right. Just one last
Oh,
quick
sorry.
comment. In terms of the federal government, I would have to say that I think the military deserves the highest credit for bringing along equality of both men and women. And that has been, I think, a tremendous inspiration throughout our own development.
I agree.
Matters, but we won't discuss that right now.
Thank you so much for your attention.